When a white store clerk laughed at Michael Jordan's mother for trying to buy shoes, he thought he was just being honest. But he was about to learn the biggest lesson of his life. The year was 1982. Dolores Jordan walked into Peterson's shoe store. With her life savings, just enough to buy her son basketball shoes. Tommy Peterson took one look at her work clothes and laughed. He told her those expensive shoes weren't for people like her. But Michael Jordan was watching through the window. And this future superstar had a plan that would change everything. What was Michael's shocking plan to teach the whole town about respect? And what family secret would blow everyone's mind at the end? The morning sun painted the small town of Willowbrook in golden light as Dolores Jordan walked down Main Street. Her worn black purse hung tight on her shoulder, and inside it was an old white envelope. She had counted the money in that envelope so many times that the bills were soft from her fingers. $57.32. Every penny saved from her 3 jobs over the past 4 months. Dolores worked as a maid at the Willowbrook Hotel 6 days a week. On Sundays, she cleaned houses for families on Maple Street. And 3 nights a week, she washed dishes at Murphy's Diner until closing time. Her hands were rough and red from all the cleaning, but she never complained. Not once. Today was special. Today, she would finally buy Michael those basketball shoes he needed for the championship game next week. Her 19-year-old son had been playing basketball since he was 7 years old. She watched him practice. Every day after school in their backyard, shooting baskets at the old hoop his father had put up. The rim was bent and the net was torn, but Michael never seemed to notice. He just kept shooting over and over until it got too dark to see. "Mama," he had said just last week, "I really need new shoes for the big game. These old ones have holes in the bottom." Dolores had looked at his feet and felt her heart break a little. His shoes were held together with tape, and she could see his socks through the worn spots. But Michael never asked for things. He knew money was tight. That's what made this moment so important to her. She stopped in front of Peterson's shoe store and took a deep breath. The store had big glass windows that showed off all the newest shoes. Right in the center was a pair of white and red basketball shoes that seemed to glow under the bright lights. Michael had pressed his nose against this very window last month, staring at those shoes with wonder in his eyes. "Those are the ones the college players wear," he had whispered. "They must make you jump higher." Now, Dolores straightened her shoulders and pushed open the heavy glass door. A little bell jingled overhead, and the smell of new leather filled her nose. The store was much fancier inside than she had expected. The floors were shiny white tile, and the shoes were displayed on glass shelves like they were precious jewels. Behind the counter stood a young white man with blonde hair slicked back with too much gel. He wore a bright red shirt with Peterson's shoes written in fancy letters across the front. His name tag said Tommy Peterson, assistant manager. Tommy was talking to another customer, a well-dressed woman in a fur coat. "Oh yes, Mrs. Hamilton," he was saying with a big smile. "These Italian leather boots just came in yesterday. They're very exclusive. Only the finest families in town can afford them." Dolores waited patiently by the door, holding her purse tight. She watched Tommy laugh and joke with Mrs. Hamilton, bringing out box after box of expensive shoes. When Mrs. Hamilton finally left with 3 shopping bags, Tommy turned toward Dolores. His smile disappeared the moment he saw her. Tommy looked at her simple blue work dress, her practical black shoes, and her tired face. His eyes moved to her rough hands and the small purse she clutched so carefully. Then he looked at the clock on the wall and sighed like he was very annoyed. "Can I help you?" he asked, but his voice was cold and unfriendly. Dolores felt her cheeks get warm, but she smiled anyway. "Yes, please. I'd like to see those basketball shoes in the window. The white and red ones." Tommy's eyebrows shot up, and he let out a short laugh. "Those shoes? Lady, do you know how much those cost?" "No, sir. But I have money saved up." Dolores pulled the white envelope from her purse and held it carefully. Tommy looked at the crumpled envelope and laughed again, louder this time. "Those are Nike Air Force Ones. They cost $85. That's more than you probably make in a month." The words hit Dolores like a slap. She felt her face burn with shame, but she kept her voice steady. "I work very hard, sir. I've been saving for months to buy these shoes for my son." "Your son?" Tommy smirked and leaned against the counter. "Let me guess. He thinks he's going to be some big basketball star, right? Lady, those shoes aren't going to make anyone play better. Maybe you should try the thrift store down the street. They might have something more in your price range." By now, other customers in the store had turned to look. An elderly man by the sneaker display shook his head sadly. A young couple near the children's shoes whispered to each other and pointed. Dolores felt like everyone was staring at her, judging her worn dress and her envelope full of crumpled bills. "Please," she said quietly, her voice almost breaking. "I just want to look at them. For my boy." Tommy rolled his eyes and made a show of looking at his expensive watch. "Look, I don't have time for this. Those shoes are for serious customers only. People who can actually afford them. Why don't you go home and think about whether you really want to waste your grocery money on basketball shoes?" The cruel words hung in the air like smoke. Dolores felt tears starting to form in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had faced harder things than this. She had worked double shifts when Michael was sick. She had walked to work in the rain when their old car broke down. She had sacrificed so much for her children, and she wasn't going to let this young man's mean words stop her now. But before she could say another word, the bell above the door jingled again. A tall, athletic young man walked into the store. He had kind eyes and wore a simple blue jacket. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. When he saw Dolores standing at the counter, his face lit up with a warm smile. "Mama," he said softly, "what are you doing here?" Dolores turned around, and her heart filled with both joy and embarrassment. "Michael, I thought you were at practice. Coach let me out early." Michael walked over and put a gentle arm around his mother's shoulders. His eyes moved from her face to Tommy behind the counter, and something changed in his expression. It was like he could read the whole story just by looking at them. Tommy, meanwhile, was staring at Michael with new interest. The young man was tall and muscular, clearly an athlete, but Tommy still didn't recognize him. To Tommy, he was just another customer. "Is everything okay here?" Michael asked, his voice calm but with an edge to it. Tommy straightened up and put on his fake sales smile again. "Oh, hi there. Are you interested in some basketball shoes? I was just explaining to this lady, that our premium shoes are quite expensive." Michael's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice stayed smooth. "Is that so? And what did you tell her exactly?" "Well, I was just being honest," Tommy said with a shrug. "Those shoes in the window cost $85. I suggested she might find something more affordable at the thrift store." The store got very quiet. Even the soft music playing overhead seemed to fade away. Michael looked at his mother's face and saw the hurt in her eyes. He saw how tightly she was holding that white envelope, how carefully she had dressed for this trip to the store. For a moment, Michael's hands clenched into fists. Every muscle in his body wanted to tell Tommy exactly what he thought of his rude behavior. But then he heard his mother's voice in his head, the same words she had said to him 1,000 times. "Son, how you treat people when you're angry shows what kind of man you really are." Instead of anger, a slow smile spread across Michael's face. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind of smile that comes right before something big is about to happen. "You know what?" Michael said, his voice still calm. "I think there's been a misunderstanding here." He leaned down and whispered something in his mother's ear. Dolores's eyes widened with surprise, and she looked up at her son with confusion and wonder. "Michael, what are you planning?" she asked quietly. "Trust me, Mama," he said, squeezing her hand gently. "Sometimes people need to learn lessons about respect. And I think it's time this town got a lesson they'll never forget." Tommy had no idea what was coming. He just stood there behind his counter, thinking he had successfully gotten rid of another customer who couldn't afford his expensive shoes. He had no clue that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life, because Tommy Peterson had never heard of Michael Jordan. But very soon, the whole world would know that name. And they would also know the story of how a cruel laugh in a small town. Shoe stores started a chain of events that would teach an entire community about dignity, respect, and the true meaning of treating people right. Michael looked at his mother one more time, then at Tommy, then back at his mother. "Wait for me outside, Mama," he said softly. "I need to make a phone call, and then we're going to show this whole town what real respect looks like." Dolores Jordan stepped outside Peterson's shoe store, her mind spinning with questions. She clutched her white envelope tight and watched through the window as her son walked back toward Tommy Peterson. What was Michael planning? And who was he going to call? Inside the store, Michael approached the counter with that same mysterious smile. Tommy looked him up and down, taking in his athletic build and confident walk. He decided this young man might actually have money to spend. So, Tommy said, putting on his friendliest voice, "What can I show you today? We have some great basketball shoes in stock." "I'm Mike," Michael said simply, not giving his last name. "I heard you talking about those shoes in the window. The Nike Air Force Ones." "Oh yes." Tommy's eyes lit up with dollar signs. "Those are our top-of-the-line basketball shoes. Very popular with serious players." "Are you on a team?" "I play a little," Michael said with a modest shrug. "Tell me about your most expensive shoes. What do you have that costs even more than those?" Tommy practically rubbed his hands together with excitement. Finally, a customer who might actually buy something expensive. He started pulling out boxes of shoes, each one costing more than the last. "These are genuine leather high tops. $120. And these limited edition sneakers just came in from California. $150. Only the best players can afford shoes like these." Michael nodded and looked at each pair carefully. "Interesting. And how do you usually treat your customers when they come in to look at expensive shoes?" "Well," Tommy puffed up with pride, "I give excellent service to people who can afford quality merchandise. I don't waste time with people who are just window shopping or can't afford what they're looking at. Like that lady who was just in here." Tommy rolled his eyes. "Exactly. That woman wanted to look at $85 shoes when she probably had $20 to her name. I saved us both time by being honest about what she could and couldn't afford." Michael's smile got a little colder, but Tommy didn't notice. "So you think you can tell how much money someone is just by looking at them?" "Of course," Tommy laughed. "It's easy. Look at their clothes, their shoes, the way they talk. That woman was clearly a maid or something. Her hands were all rough from cleaning. People like that don't buy premium basketball shoes." "People like that," Michael repeated quietly. "Right. You understand. You're obviously different. I can tell. You have class. You probably come from a good family with money." Michael was quiet for a moment, studying Tommy's face. Then he said, "You know what? I need to think about this purchase. But I might be back later with some friends who are also interested in expensive shoes." "Great." Tommy handed him a business card. "Ask for me specifically. Tommy Peterson. My father owns this store, so I can give you the best deals." "Tommy Peterson," Michael said, like he was memorizing the name. "I'll definitely remember that." Michael walked outside to where his mother was waiting by the window. She looked worried and confused. "Michael, honey, what are you doing? That young man was very rude to me, but I don't want any trouble." "Mama, there's not going to be any trouble, but there is going to be a lesson." Michael put his arm around her shoulders. "Do you trust me?" "Of course I trust you. But what kind of lesson?" "The kind that changes how people think about treating others with respect." Michael looked down the street toward the payphone outside Murphy's Diner. "I need to make that phone call now. Can you wait here for just a few minutes?" Dolores nodded, though she still looked confused. She watched her son walk down the street with long, confident steps. Even from far away, she could see there was something special about the way Michael carried himself. Other people on the street seemed to notice it too. They turned to look at him as he passed, like they could sense he was someone important. At the payphone, Michael dropped in a quarter and dialed a number he knew by heart. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered. "Martinez. Sporting Goods, this is Carlos." "Uncle Carlos, it's Michael." "Michael, how's my favorite nephew? How's your mama?" Michael looked back toward the shoe store where his mother was still waiting. "That's actually why I'm calling, Uncle Carlos. Mama just got treated very badly at the shoe store here in town, and I think it's time we did something about the way some people treat others in this community." Carlos Martinez had left Willowbrook 20 years ago to build his sporting goods business in the big city. But he had never forgotten where he came from, and he had never stopped caring about his sister Dolores and her family. Though Dolores didn't know it, Carlos had been quietly helping them for years, sending money through Michael that he told her came from basketball camp prizes or part-time jobs. "Tell me what happened," Carlos said, and his voice got serious. Michael told him about Tommy Peterson and the cruel way he had treated their mother. As he talked, he could hear his uncle getting angrier and angrier. "That boy needs to learn a lesson," Carlos said when Michael finished the story. "And I think I know just how to teach it to him." "What do you have in mind?" "I've been thinking about opening a new store anyway. Maybe it's time I came back to Willowbrook for a visit. How would you like to help me teach this Tommy Peterson about respect?" Michael grinned. "What's the plan?" "Give me 2 hours. I'll drive down there in my business car and pay a visit to Peterson's shoe store. I'll tell them I'm a successful businessman looking for a partnership. Then we'll see how Tommy treats people when he thinks there's money involved. And then, we'll give him a choice. He can learn to treat everyone with respect, or he can face the consequences of his actions. Either way, your mama is going to get the respect she deserves. Michael felt a warm feeling spread through his chest. Even though Carlos lived far away, he always came through for family. Thank you, Uncle Carlos. But don't tell Mama who you really are yet. I want that to be a surprise. You got it, nephew. And Michael, your mama raised you right. She taught you to stand up for what's right without losing your temper. That's going to take you far in life. After Michael hung up the phone, he walked back to where his mother was waiting. She was looking in the window of Peterson's shoe store again, probably thinking about those basketball shoes she still wanted to buy for him. Everything's set up, Mama, he said. In about 2 hours, a businessman is going to come to that store. His name is Mr. Martinez, and he's going to test Tommy Peterson to see if he's learned anything about treating people with respect. What kind of test? He's going to ask Tommy to help his friend buy some shoes. That friend is going to be you. Dolores looked uncertain. Michael, I don't want to go back in there. That young man made me feel so small. I know he did, Mama. But this is your chance to hold your head high and show him that you deserve the same respect as any other customer. Mr. Martinez will be watching everything. If Tommy treats you right this time, maybe he's learned his lesson. If he doesn't, then what? Michael's smile was mysterious again. Then the whole town is going to learn a lesson they'll never forget. Meanwhile, back inside the shoe store, Tommy was bragging to his friend Jake Mitchell, who had stopped by during his lunch break. Jake worked at his father's law office down the street and always enjoyed hearing Tommy's stories about putting difficult customers in their place. You should have seen this woman, Tommy was saying. She came in here with this sad little envelope, full of crumpled bills, wanting to look at our most expensive basketball shoes. Can you believe it? Jake laughed. What did you tell her? I told her the truth. I said those shoes cost more than she makes in a month and suggested she try the thrift store instead. The look on her face was priceless. Classic, Jake said. I bet she won't be back. Tommy looked out the window and saw Dolores still standing there with Michael. Actually, she's still hanging around outside with some guy, probably trying to work up the nerve to come back in and beg me to give her a discount. Well, if she does come back, you know what to do. Absolutely. I'm not running a charity here. This is a business for people who can afford quality merchandise. Neither Tommy nor Jake had any idea that in less than 2 hours, a sleek black sedan would pull up outside their store. They didn't know that the well-dressed businessman who would step out of that car had the power to change their lives forever. And they certainly didn't know that this simple, young man who had been asking about expensive shoes was about to become the most famous basketball player in the world. All they knew was that they felt very proud of themselves for keeping the wrong kind of people out of their fancy shoe store, but that pride was about to cost them more than they could possibly imagine. Because when you treat people badly, especially when those people have family who love them, the consequences can be bigger than you ever expected. Asterisk and Michael Jordan was about to show Tommy Peterson just how big those consequences could be. Point 2. Hours later, a shiny black sedan pulled up in front of Peterson's shoe store. The car looked expensive, with chrome that sparkled in the afternoon sun and windows so clean they looked like mirrors. Tommy Peterson was helping an elderly customer when he saw the car through the window. His eyes got wide. In a small town like Willowbrook, cars like that meant only one thing: serious money. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a man in a perfectly tailored dark blue suit. He was tall and confident, with graying hair at his temples and shoes that probably cost more than Tommy made in a week. The man straightened his tie, looked at the Petersons' shoe store sign, and smiled. Jake, Tommy whispered to his friend, who was still hanging around the store. Look at that guy. He's got to be loaded. Carlos Martinez walked toward the store with the smooth steps of a man who was used to getting respect wherever he went. He had built his chain of sporting goods stores from nothing, and now he owned 12 locations across 3 states. But, more importantly, he was a man who had never forgotten what it felt like to be treated poorly because of how he looked or where he came from. The little bell jingled as Carlos entered the store. Tommy immediately abandoned his elderly customer and rushed over with his biggest smile. Good afternoon, sir. Welcome to Peterson's shoe store. I'm Tommy Peterson, assistant manager. How can I help you today? Carlos looked around the store slowly, taking in the shiny displays and expensive shoes. Good afternoon, Tommy. I'm Carlos Martinez. He handed Tommy a business card. I own Martinez Sporting Goods. Perhaps you've heard of us. Tommy's hands actually shook a little as he read the card. Martinez Sporting Goods was famous throughout the region. They had stores in all the big cities, and Tommy had heard they made millions of dollars every year. Oh my goodness, yes, sir. This is such an honor. What brings you to our little store? Carlos smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I'm always looking for new business opportunities. I've heard good things about Peterson's shoes, and I'm considering a partnership. You know, help you expand, maybe open some new locations. Tommy felt like he might faint from excitement. A partnership with Martinez Sporting Goods could make him rich beyond his wildest dreams. That sounds incredible, Mr. Martinez. What can I do to show you how well we run our business? Well, Carlos said, looking around the store again, I like to see how a business treats all of its customers. Rich customers, poor customers, everyone in between. You see, Tommy, in the sporting goods business, we serve everyone from professional athletes to kids just starting out. The way you treat people tells me everything I need to know about your character. Tommy nodded eagerly, even though he felt a tiny flutter of worry in his stomach. Of course, sir. We treat everyone with respect here. Excellent. As it happens, I have a friend who will be coming in shortly to look at some basketball shoes. I'd like you to help her personally. Consider it a test of your customer service skills. Absolutely. I'll give her my very best attention. What's her name? You'll know her when you see her, Carlos said mysteriously. She's a hardworking woman who's been saving up to buy something special. I want to see how you handle customers who have to work for their money. Tommy felt another flutter of worry, but he pushed it away. How hard could it be to be nice to one customer? Especially if it meant impressing Carlos Martinez. No problem at all, sir. I'll treat her like a queen. Carlos checked his expensive watch. She should be here any minute. I'll just browse around while we wait. Outside the store, Michael was talking quietly to his mother. Remember, Mama, just be yourself. Ask to see those basketball shoes you wanted. Don't let anyone make you feel small. Dolores smoothed down her dress nervously. I still don't understand what's happening, Michael. Why does this Mr. Martinez want to help us? Because he believes in treating people right, Michael said, which was true even if it wasn't the whole truth. And because you deserve respect, no matter what anyone else thinks. What if that Tommy boy is rude to me again? Michael's jaw tightened. Then Mr. Martinez will see exactly what kind of person he really is. And then the real lesson begins. Through the window, they could see Carlos Martinez looking at shoes while Tommy hovered nearby, like an excited puppy. Tommy kept pointing at different displays and talking quickly, obviously trying to impress his important visitor. Okay, Mama, Michael said softly. It's time. Dolores took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked toward the store entrance. The same little bell jingled as she pushed open the door, just like it had that morning. But this time, everything was different. This time, Carlos Martinez was watching. Tommy looked up from the display he was showing Carlos and saw Dolores enter. For just a moment, his face showed the same sneer as before. Then he remembered that Carlos was watching, and he quickly changed his expression, but it was too late. Carlos had seen that initial look of disgust, and his eyes had gone cold. Ah, Carlos said quietly. I believe this is my friend now. Tommy's mouth fell open. This was Carlos Martinez's friend? The same woman he had laughed at and insulted just hours before. The woman he had told to go to the thrift store. Dolores walked toward the counter with quiet dignity. She didn't look at Tommy directly, but she held her head high. In her hand was the same white envelope, a little more wrinkled from her nervous holding. Good afternoon, she said politely. I'd like to look at some basketball shoes, please. Tommy's mind raced. He was trapped. If he was rude to her, Carlos Martinez would see his true character. But if he was suddenly nice to her, she might say something about how badly he had treated her earlier. Carlos stepped forward with a warm smile. Mrs. Jordan, how wonderful to see you again. Tommy, this is the friend I was telling you about. I trust you'll give her your very best service. Tommy's hands were sweating now. Of course, Mr. Martinez. Absolutely. He turned to Dolores with a forced smile that looked more like a grimace. What kind of basketball shoes were you interested in? Dolores looked at him steadily. Same ones I asked about this morning. The white and red ones in the window. The words hit Tommy like a punch to the stomach. She had said it. She had reminded him of their earlier encounter, right in front of Carlos Martinez. Now his potential business partner would know exactly how he had treated this woman just hours before. Carlos raised an eyebrow. This morning? You were here this morning, Mrs. Jordan? Yes, sir. I came in to ask about buying shoes for my son. But I was told that I probably couldn't afford them and should try the thrift store instead. The temperature in the store seemed to drop 10 degrees. Carlos Martinez turned to look at Tommy with an expression that could have frozen fire. Is that so? Carlos said, his voice dangerously quiet. Tommy, is this how you normally treat customers who come into your store? Tommy felt like he was drowning. His dreams of partnership and riches were crashing down around him. Mr. Martinez, I can explain. Oh, I think you've explained quite enough already, Carlos said. Mrs. Jordan, please tell me exactly what happened when you came in this morning. And as Dolores began to tell the story of her humiliation, Tommy realized that his cruel laughter had just cost him everything he had ever wanted. But the worst part was still coming, because Carlos Martinez was about to ask him a question that would change everything. Tommy Peterson stood frozen behind the counter, his face turning red as Dolores Jordan calmly told Carlos Martinez about her morning visit to the store. Every word she spoke felt like a nail being hammered into the coffin of his dreams. He laughed at me, Dolores said quietly, her voice steady and dignified. He said the shoes cost more than I make in a month. He told me I should go to the thrift store because people like me don't buy premium basketball shoes. Carlos Martinez listened without saying a word, but his dark eyes never left Tommy's face. Tommy felt like he was shrinking under that stare, getting smaller and smaller until he might just disappear completely. People like you, Carlos repeated slowly. That's an interesting phrase, Tommy. What did you mean by that? Tommy's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. His mind raced, trying to find words that might save him from this disaster. Mr. Martinez, I was just being honest about the prices. I didn't want her to be disappointed if she couldn't afford. Stop, Carlos said, holding up one hand. The single word cut through Tommy's excuses like a knife. Let me ask you something, Tommy. When Mrs. Jordan walked into this store this morning, what did you see? I don't understand the question. It's simple. When you looked at this woman, what did you see? Tommy glanced at Dolores, who was watching him with calm, patient eyes. There was no anger in her face, no desire for revenge. She just looked tired and sad, like someone who had been hurt but wasn't surprised by it. I saw. Tommy started, then stopped. He knew the truth would destroy any chance he had with Carlos Martinez. But lying might make things even worse. You saw her clothes, Carlos said when Tommy couldn't finish. You saw her rough hands. You saw an envelope with wrinkled money. And you decided that meant she wasn't good enough for your store. That's not. I was just trying to. Tommy's voice trailed off. He couldn't find words to defend what he had done because there was no defense for it. Carlos walked closer to the counter, and Tommy could smell his expensive cologne. Let me tell you what I see when I look at Mrs. Jordan. I see a woman who works 3 jobs to take care of her family. I see someone who saved for months to buy something special for her son. I see calloused hands that prove she's not afraid of hard work. I see dignity and strength and love. Tommy felt his eyes filling with tears. He had never thought about any of those things. He had just seen someone who looked different from his usual customers and decided she didn't belong. But here's what's really interesting, Carlos continued. You treated Mrs. Jordan one way this morning when you thought she was poor. Then a well-dressed young man came in asking about expensive shoes, and I bet you treated him completely differently. Tommy's face burned with shame. Carlos was absolutely right. He had been rude and dismissive to Dolores, but friendly and helpful to Michael. Now, Carlos said, I'm going to give you a choice, Tommy. You can learn from this mistake, or you can keep being the kind of person who judges people by their appearance. Mrs. Jordan still wants to buy those basketball shoes for her son. You can help her with respect and kindness, or you can continue to show me exactly why I should never do business with this store. Tommy looked back and forth between Carlos and Dolores. His hands were shaking, and sweat was running down his back despite the air conditioning. Everything he wanted in life depended on what happened in the next few minutes. Mrs. Jordan, he said, his voice cracking slightly. I apologize for how I treated you this morning. Would you? Would you like to see those basketball shoes now? Dolores studied his face for a long moment. Are you apologizing because you're sorry, or because Mr. Martinez is watching? The question hit Tommy like a slap. She had seen right through him, straight to the truth he didn't want to admit. He was apologizing because he was scared, not because he truly understood what he had done wrong. Tommy started, then stopped. He looked at Dolores's worn dress and tired eyes. He thought about her working 3 jobs, saving every penny, for months just to buy shoes for her son. He thought about how excited and hopeful she must have been when she walked into his store that morning, and how his cruel words had crushed that hope. For the first time, Tommy really tried to imagine how his words had made her feel. "I'm sorry," he said again, and this time his voice was quieter, more genuine. "I'm sorry I was rude to you. I'm sorry I made you feel bad. You didn't deserve that." Dolores nodded slowly. "Thank you. That means something." But Carlos Martinez wasn't finished with his test. He had been watching Tommy carefully, and he could see that the young man was still more scared than sorry. Tommy walked over to the window display and carefully took out the white and red basketball shoes. His hands were still shaking as he brought them to the counter. "These are the Nike Air Force Ones. They're $85. Dolores opened her white envelope and began counting out her crumpled bills. 47, 48, 49. She counted slowly and carefully, smoothing each bill on the counter. Tommy watched her count, and he could see how much this moment meant to her. But he also noticed something else. As Carlos Martinez had said, her hands were rough and red from years of hard work. There were small scars on her fingers from cleaning chemicals and kitchen accidents. These were the hands of someone who had never been given anything easy in life. 56, 57. Dolores's voice got quieter as she reached the end of her money. $57.32. She looked up at Tommy with hope in her eyes. "I know it's not enough, but I was wondering, is there any way? Maybe if I could pay the rest next week when I get paid again." Tommy stared at the money on the counter. $57.32. She was almost $30 short. In the old Tommy, the Tommy from this morning, would have laughed and told her to come back when she had the full amount. But something was changing inside him as he looked at her hopeful face. This wasn't just about money. This was about a mother's love for her son. This was about dreams and sacrifice and the kind of love that works 3 jobs just to buy a pair of shoes. Tommy glanced at Carlos Martinez, who was watching everything with those dark, serious eyes. Then he looked back at Dolores. "Mrs. Jordan," he said slowly, "these shoes are normally $85. But we have a special program for hardworking families. For you, they're $57.32. Dolores's eyes widened. "Really? Are you sure?" Before Tommy could answer, Carlos Martinez stepped forward with a strange smile on his face. "Actually, Tommy, before we finish this sale, I have one more question for you." Tommy's stomach dropped. What now? Hadn't he done the right thing? Carlos looked directly into Tommy's eyes and asked the question that would change everything. "Do you know who this woman's son is?" Tommy Peterson stared at Carlos Martinez with confusion written all over his face. "Do I know who her son is? What does that matter? I mean, she said she has a son who plays basketball, but..." Tommy's voice trailed off as he tried to understand why Carlos was asking this question. Why would it matter who Mrs. Jordan's son was? She was just a cleaning lady trying to buy basketball shoes. Her son was probably just some kid on the high school team. "I don't know who he is," Tommy said with a shrug. "And I don't really care. People are people, right? It shouldn't matter who someone's family is." Carlos Martinez smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. "That's very interesting, Tommy. You say it shouldn't matter who someone's family is. But this morning, you treated Mrs. Jordan like she was nobody. You laughed at her. You told her to go to the thrift store. You made her feel small and worthless." Tommy's face turned red again. "But I apologized for that. And I gave her a discount on the shoes." "Yes, you did. But only after you realized I was watching. Only after you knew your business deal might be in danger." Carlos walked closer to the counter. "Tell me, Tommy, if I hadn't been here today, would you have treated Mrs. Jordan any differently the second time she came in?" Tommy opened his mouth to say yes, but the word wouldn't come out. Because deep down, he knew the truth. If Carlos Martinez hadn't been in the store, Tommy probably would have been just as rude to Mrs. Jordan as he had been that morning. "I thought so. Carlos said quietly. You see, Tommy, I believe that how we treat people when no one important is watching shows who we really are. And this morning, when you thought no one was watching, you showed Mrs. Jordan exactly who you are. Dolores Jordan had been standing quietly through this whole conversation, but now she spoke up. Mr. Martinez, it's okay. Tommy apologized, and that's enough for me. I just want to buy these shoes for my boy and go home. Carlos turned to her with gentle eyes. Mrs. Jordan, you are a very kind woman. Too kind, perhaps. But I think Tommy needs to understand the full weight of his actions. He turned back to Tommy. You asked if it mattered who Mrs. Jordan's son is. Let me show you why it matters. Carlos walked to the front door of the store and opened it. Michael, he called. Could you come in here, please? Tommy watched through the window as the same young man from earlier walked toward the store. Mike, he had called himself. The friendly guy who had been asking about expensive basketball shoes. Michael Jordan stepped through the door with that same confident walk Tommy had noticed before. But now, with Carlos Martinez calling him by name, something felt different. About the moment. Tommy, Carlos said, I'd like you to meet Michael Jordan. Tommy nodded. Yeah, we met earlier. He was asking about basketball shoes. Carlos smiled. Did he tell you his last name? No, I don't think so. He just said his name was Mike. Michael Jordan, Carlos repeated slowly, like he was waiting for something to click in Tommy's brain. Tommy stared at Michael for a long moment. The name sounded familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. Should I know that name? Michael stepped forward with a small smile. I play basketball, Tommy. College basketball at the University of North Carolina. Oh, Tommy said, still not understanding. That's nice. Carlos shook his head in amazement. Tommy, Michael Jordan is not just any college basketball player. He's the best college basketball player in the entire country. He's going to be drafted by the NBA next year. Sports magazines are calling him the most promising young athlete they've ever seen. Tommy's eyes widened a little, but he still didn't seem to grasp the full meaning of what he was hearing. Let me put this in terms you might understand better, Carlos continued. In a few years, Michael Jordan is going to be the most famous basketball player in the world. His name is going to be known by every person in America. He's going to make millions of dollars playing basketball and selling shoes and other products. Now Tommy was starting to look worried. Okay, but what does that have to do with what it has to do with, Tommy, is that you treated his mother like dirt, Carlos said, his voice getting harder. You laughed at the woman who raised the most talented basketball player on earth. You told her she wasn't good enough for your store. You made her feel ashamed for trying to buy something special for her son. Tommy's face went white. He looked from Carlos to Michael to Mrs. Jordan, and suddenly the full weight of his mistake hit him like a truck. Oh no, he whispered. Oh no, oh no, oh no. Michael stepped closer to the counter. Tommy, do you know what my mother taught me about treating people? Tommy shook his head, unable to speak. She taught me that every person deserves respect. No matter what job they have, no matter how much money they make, no matter what they look like or where they come from. She taught me that how you treat people when they can't do anything for you shows what kind of person you really are. Tommy felt like he was going to be sick. Mr. Jordan, I had no idea who you were. If I had known, stop right there. Michael said firmly. If you had known who I was, you would have treated my mother differently? So it's okay to be cruel to people as long as they're not related to someone famous. No, that's not what I meant. Then what did you mean, Tommy? Michael's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. Because it sounds to me like you think some people deserve respect and others don't. Tommy was crying now, tears streaming down his face. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I never thought about. You never thought about what? Michael asked. You never thought about how your words might hurt someone? You never thought about how hard my mother works to take care of our family? You never thought about treating her like a human being? Dolores Jordan stepped forward and put a gentle hand on her son's arm. Michael, that's enough. He's learned his lesson. But Michael wasn't finished. No, Mama. This isn't just about Tommy anymore. This is about how people in this whole town treat others. It's about teaching everyone that respect isn't something you only give to people who can help you. Tommy wiped his eyes and looked up. What? What are you going to do? Michael Jordan looked at him for a long moment, then smiled that mysterious smile again. I'm going to teach this entire town a lesson about respect, Tommy. And you're going to help me do it. How? I'm organizing a community basketball game. And you, Tommy Peterson, are going to be on my team. But first, you're going to spend 1 week learning what real work looks like. You're going to work alongside the people you've been looking down on. You're going to see what their lives are really like. Tommy's mouth fell open. What kind of work? Michael's smile got wider. The kind of work my mother does, Tommy. You're going to learn what it means to serve other people instead of judging them. And with that announcement, Michael Jordan set in motion a plan that would change not just Tommy Peterson, but the entire town of Willowbrook forever. Word spread through Willowbrook faster than fire through dry grass. By evening, everyone in town had heard the incredible story. Michael Jordan, the famous basketball player, was in their little town. His mother had been treated badly at Peterson's shoe store. And now Michael was planning something that would shake the community to its core. The story got bigger with each telling. At Murphy's Diner, the waitresses whispered about it while pouring coffee. At the barbershop on Oak Street, men argued about whether Tommy Peterson deserved what was coming to him. At the grocery store, mothers talked about teaching their children to treat everyone with kindness. But the biggest crowd gathered at Peterson's shoe store itself, where Michael Jordan stood outside with a microphone borrowed from the high school. Carlos Martinez had made some phone calls, and somehow a small platform had appeared on the sidewalk. People pressed in from all directions, craning their necks to see the young man who was about to become the most famous athlete in the world, Tommy. Peterson stood beside Michael, his face still red from crying. His father, Harold Peterson, had rushed down from his office when he heard what was happening. Now Harold stood at the edge of the crowd, looking confused and angry. "Ladies and gentlemen," Michael began, his voice carrying clearly over the crowd. "Thank you for coming out this evening. I'm Michael Jordan, and I want to tell you why I'm here." The crowd grew quiet. Even the children stopped talking and listened. "This morning, my mother came to this shoe store to buy me a pair of basketball shoes. She had saved for months, working 3 jobs, putting aside every penny she could. She was excited to surprise me with something special for the championship game next week." Michael paused and looked around at all the faces watching him. But when she walked into that store, she wasn't treated like a valued customer. She was treated like she didn't belong. Tommy Peterson laughed at her. He told her the shoes cost more than she made in a month. He suggested she go to the thrift store instead. Angry murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some people shook their heads in disgust. Others looked at Tommy with disappointment. "Now," Michael continued, "Tommy has apologized. And I believe people can change. But words are easy. Real change requires action. So I'm challenging Tommy Peterson and this entire community to learn what respect really means." Harold Peterson pushed through the crowd. "Now wait just a minute, young man. You can't come into our town and—" "Mr. Peterson," Michael said calmly, "your son insulted my mother. He treated her with cruelty and disrespect. I'm offering him a chance to learn from his mistake. Would you prefer I handle this differently?" Harold's mouth snapped shut. He had heard enough about Michael Jordan to know this was not someone to mess with. Even in 1982, Michael was already being called the greatest college basketball player of all time. "Here's my challenge," Michael announced to the crowd. "Tommy Peterson is going to spend 1 week working alongside the people he's looked down on. He's going to be a janitor at the community center. He's going to wash dishes at Murphy's Diner. He's going to help my mother clean hotel rooms. He's going to learn what real work looks like." The crowd buzzed with excitement. This was better than any TV show they'd ever seen. "And at the end of that week," Michael continued, "we're going to have a basketball game right here on Main Street. Tommy will play on a team with me. If we lose, I'll publicly apologize for embarrassing him. But if we win, Tommy and everyone else who has treated people poorly in this town will apologize to the people they've hurt." "That's not fair," shouted Jake Mitchell from the crowd. "You're a professional athlete. Of course you'll win." Michael smiled. "You're right, Jake. It wouldn't be fair if I played at full strength. So I'll only use my left hand during the game. And I'll wear regular shoes instead of basketball shoes. That should even things out." The crowd gasped. Michael Jordan was so confident in his message that he was willing to handicap himself just to prove a point. "Who's going to be on the other team?" someone called out. "Anyone who thinks it's okay to treat people badly based on how they look or how much money they have," Michael replied. "Anyone who thinks some people deserve respect and others don't." More murmurs went through the crowd. People were looking at each other, wondering who might step forward to defend Tommy Peterson. And who's going to supervise this whole thing? Harold Peterson demanded. How do we know this is legitimate? Before Michael could answer, a familiar voice spoke up from the crowd. I'll supervise it. Everyone turned to see Mrs. Sarah Chun, the principal of Willowbrook High School. She was a small woman with gray hair, but everyone in town respected her. She had been teaching for 30 years and had never been unfair to anyone. Mrs. Chun, Michael said with a respectful nod. Would you really be willing to oversee Tommy's week of community service? I certainly would, she said firmly. I've been watching how some people in this town treat others, and it's time for a change. If Tommy Peterson is brave enough to accept your challenge, I'll make sure he does it right. Tommy looked around at all the faces watching him. Some people looked angry. Others looked curious. A few looked like they felt sorry for him. But there was no way out. If he said no, he would look like a coward in front of the whole town. I accept, he said quietly. Louder, Michael said, so everyone can hear you. I accept the challenge. Tommy called out, his voice cracking with nervousness. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. This was the most exciting thing that had happened in Willowbrook in years, but not everyone was happy. Harold Peterson was furious that his son had been put in this position. Jake Mitchell was angry that his friend was being humiliated. And several other people in the crowd looked uncomfortable, probably because they recognized themselves in Tommy's behavior. As the crowd began to break up, Michael noticed something interesting. The people who were most upset about his challenge were the ones who probably treated others poorly themselves. The people who were excited about it were the ones who worked hard and treated everyone with respect. Mrs. Chin approached Michael and his mother. Mr. Jordan, I think what you're doing is wonderful. But I have one concern. What's that, ma'am? What if Tommy learns his lesson during the week? What if he really changes? Will you still humiliate him with the basketball game? Michael thought about this for a moment. Mrs. Chun, this isn't about humiliating anyone. It's about teaching the whole community that every person deserves respect. If Tommy really learns that lesson, then the basketball game becomes a celebration, not a punishment. Mrs. Chin smiled. You're very wise for someone so young. My mother taught me well, Michael said, putting his arm around Dolores Jordan. As people walked away from the store, they were already talking about the week ahead. What would Tommy Peterson learn from washing dishes and cleaning bathrooms? Would he really change, or would he just pretend to be better until the week was over? But the biggest question on everyone's mind was this. Who else in Willowbrook had been treating people badly? And would Michael Jordan's challenge change them too? By the time the sun set that evening, everyone in town was asking themselves the same question. How do I treat people who can't do anything for me? And for many of them, the answer was uncomfortable to think about. Tommy Peterson went home that night knowing his life would never be the same. In 6 days, he would either be a changed man or a broken one. That the challenge had begun. Monday morning came too soon for Tommy Peterson. He stood outside Murphy's diner at 6 o'clock, wearing old jeans and a t-shirt that his mother had found in the back of his closet. His hands were soft and clean, his back was straight, and he had no idea what real work felt like. Mrs. Chin arrived exactly on time, carrying a clipboard and wearing a determined expression. Good morning, Tommy. Are you ready for your first day? Tommy nodded, though he didn't feel ready at all. Through the window of the diner, he could see people already eating breakfast and drinking coffee. Soon he would be washing their dirty dishes and cleaning up their messes. The owner of Murphy's Diner, an older man named Frank Murphy, unlocked the door and let them in. So you're the famous Tommy Peterson, Frank said with a grunt. Hope you're not expecting any special treatment just because your daddy owns half the town. No, sir, Tommy said quietly. I just want to learn. Frank introduced Tommy to Roberto Silva, the man who would be training him. Roberto was about 40 years old, with calloused hands and kind eyes. He spoke with a slight accent that Tommy had never really noticed before, even though Roberto had been working in town for years. Welcome, Tommy, Roberto said with a warm smile. Today you learn what it means to work with your hands. Roberto led Tommy to the back of the diner, where mountains of dirty dishes waited in big metal sinks. The water was hot and sudsy, and steam rose up like fog. Tommy had never washed a dish in his life. At home, his family had a dishwasher, and his mother cleaned up after him. First, Roberto explained, you scrape off all the food. Then you wash in the hot soapy water. Then you rinse in the clean water. Then you dry and put away. It sounds simple, but doing it for 8 hours is not easy. Tommy picked up his first dirty plate. It was covered with dried egg and syrup, and the smell made his stomach turn. He scraped and washed and rinsed, but it took him 5 minutes to clean one plate. Roberto could clean 5 plates in that same time. "You'll get faster," Roberto said. Kindly. Everyone starts slow. As the morning went on, more dirty dishes kept coming from the dining room. Tommy's hands got wrinkled from the hot water. His back started to ache from bending over the sink. His arms felt tired from lifting the heavy plates and pots. During a quiet moment, Tommy found himself talking to Roberto. "How long have you been doing this job?" 3 years, Roberto replied. "But I do not plan to do it forever." "What do you mean?" Roberto smiled and pulled a book from his back pocket. It was a thick textbook about engineering, with pages full of complicated diagrams and formulas. "I study at night. I have a degree in engineering from my country, but here in America, I need to take more classes and pass tests to get my license." Tommy stared at the book in amazement. "You're an engineer?" "I was an engineer in Mexico. Here, I wash dishes and study to become an engineer again. It is hard work, but my family needs me to succeed." But you're just a dishwasher," Tommy said, then immediately felt ashamed of his words. Roberto's smile never faded. "I am not just anything, Tommy. I am a man who takes care of his family. I am a student learning new things. I am someone who works hard for his dreams. The job I do to pay the bills does not define who I am as a person." For the first time, Tommy began to understand something important. He had looked at Roberto and seen only a dishwasher. But Roberto was actually a brilliant man working toward his goals, supporting his family, and keeping his dignity while doing hard work. At lunchtime, Tommy's hands were red and sore. His clothes were soaked with dishwater and sweat. He had never been so tired in his life. But Roberto seemed just as energetic as when they had started. "How do you do this every day?" Tommy asked as they ate their lunch. "You find meaning in the work," Roberto explained. "Every dish I wash helps my family eat. Every dollar I earn brings me closer to my engineering license. Every day I work hard. I teach my children that nothing is given to you in life. You must earn what you want." That afternoon, Mrs. Chun stopped by to check on Tommy's progress. She found him scrubbing a large pot, his face red with effort and frustration. "How is it going, Tommy?" she asked. "It's harder than I thought," Tommy admitted. "My hands hurt, my back hurts, and I keep falling behind. I never realized how much work this was." "And what do you think about Roberto?" Tommy looked over at Roberto, who was efficiently washing dishes while humming a quiet song. "He's not what I expected. I always thought. I never really thought about him at all. But he's really smart. He speaks 4 languages, and he's studying to be an engineer." "For languages?" Mrs. Chin asked. "Spanish, English, Portuguese, and French." Tommy said, "I can barely speak English properly, and I was born here." Mrs. Chin nodded. "What else have you learned today?" Tommy thought for a moment. "I learned that I've been judging people without knowing anything about them. I thought Roberto was just a dishwasher, but he's actually one of the smartest people I've ever met. And he works harder than anyone I know." "That's a good start, Tommy. But this is only day 1. You have 6 more days to go." Tuesday was even harder. Tommy's muscles ached from the day before, and his soft hands were getting blisters. But Roberto was patient with him, teaching him better techniques and sharing stories about his life. Tommy learned that Roberto sent money to his parents in Mexico every month. He learned that Roberto was married to a woman named Maria who cleaned houses during the day and took English classes at night. He learned that they had 2 young children who got perfect grades in school because their parents taught them that education was the most important thing in the world. "I want my children to have opportunities one did not have," Roberto explained. "That is why I work so hard now, so they can have easier lives later." On Wednesday, Tommy worked at the community center with Ms. Betty Washington, an elderly African-American woman who had been volunteering there for 15 years. Tommy had seen her around town many times, but had never spoken to her. He had always assumed she was just some old woman with nothing better to do. He could not have been more wrong at a mess. Betty turned out to be a retired school teacher who had taught for 40 years. She had a master's degree in education and had once been nominated for Teacher of the Year for the entire state. Now she spent her retirement teaching adults how to read. "You'd be surprised how many grown people never learned to read properly," she told Tommy as they set up chairs for an evening class. They're embarrassed about it, so they try to hide it. But they come here at night, after work, to learn something they should have learned as children. Why do you do this for free? Tommy asked .ms. Betty smiled. Because everyone deserves a chance to learn, honey. And because I know what it feels like to be looked down on for things that aren't your fault. That evening, Tommy watched Ms. Betty teach a class of 8 adults. There was a construction worker who had dropped out of school in 3rd grade to help support his family. There was a grandmother who had never been allowed to go to school because of her race. There was a young mother who had been too shy to ask for help when she was struggling in school. Ms. Betty treated each of them with patience and respect, never making them feel stupid or ashamed. She celebrated every small success and encouraged them when they got frustrated. After the class, Tommy helped Ms. Betty clean up the room. Ms. Washington, he said quietly, I'm sorry I never noticed what you do here. That's all right, honey. Most people don't notice the work that doesn't make money or get recognition. But it's often the most important work of all. On Thursday, Tommy worked with his mother's friend Mrs. Garcia, who cleaned offices downtown at night after working her day job at the factory. Tommy had never realized that some people work 2 jobs just to make ends meet. On Friday, the hardest day of all, Tommy worked alongside Dolores Jordan herself, cleaning rooms at the Willowbrook Hotel. He watched her work with quiet dignity, treating each room like it belonged to someone she cared about. She changed sheets with care, cleaned bathrooms, until they sparkled, and always left little touches that made the rooms feel welcoming. Mrs. Jordan, Tommy said as they cleaned their 10th room of the day, I want you to know how sorry I am for the way I treated you. Dolores stopped making the bed and looked at him. Tommy, you've been working hard all week. You've been learning. That's worth more than any apology. But I was so cruel to you. I said terrible things. Yes, you did. But now you understand why those words hurt. You've walked in the shoes of people like me. You know what real work feels like. You know that being poor doesn't make someone less worthy of respect. Tommy felt tears in his eyes. How do you forgive someone like me? Dolores finished tucking in the sheets and smiled at him. Because holding on to anger hurts me more than it hurts you. And because I believe people can change when they truly understand their mistakes. That night, Tommy went home exhausted but changed. His hands were rough and blistered. His back ached constantly. His feet hurt from standing all day. But his heart felt different. Lighter somehow that he had learned that Roberto Silva was not just a dishwasher, but a brilliant man working toward his dreams. He had learned that Ms. Betty Washington was not just an old woman, but a dedicated teacher changing lives. He had learned that his mother's friend Mrs. Garcia was not just a cleaning lady, but a strong woman supporting her family through pure determination. Most importantly, he had learned that every person he met had a story, had dreams, had dignity that deserved respect. But Tommy's biggest lesson was still to come. Because tomorrow, on his final day of community service, he was going to discover a secret about his own family that would shock him to his core. Saturday morning was Tommy's final day of community service. He was supposed to help clean the old Peterson building downtown, the very first building his grandfather had owned when the Peterson family started their business empire in Willowbrook. Mrs. Chen met him at 7 o'clock sharp, just like every other day that week. But this time, she looked more serious than usual. Tommy, she said, today you're going to work with Mr. Henry Washington. He's the building supervisor, and he's been taking care of Peterson properties for over 20 years. Tommy nodded. The name Washington sounded familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. Is he related to Ms. Betty Washington? He's her husband, Mrs. Chun said with a small smile. You'll find out that the Washington family has quite a history with your family. They walked into the old brick building that housed several small offices and apartments. The hallways were clean but worn, and everything smelled like old wood and floor wax. Tommy had never been inside this building before, even though his family owned it.mr. Henry Washington was waiting for them in the lobby. He was a tall, dignified man in his 70s with gray hair and strong hands. He wore simple work clothes, but he carried himself like someone who deserved respect. So you're Harold Peterson's boy, Mr. Washington said, looking Tommy up and down. You look just like your daddy did when he was young. You knew my father when he was young? Tommy asked.mr. Washington chuckled. Oh yes, I knew your daddy very well. In fact, I helped him get his start in business. But I suppose he never told you that story. Tommy felt confused. His father had always talked about building the family business from nothing, about working hard and making smart decisions. He had never mentioned getting help from anyone. What kind of help? Tommy asked. Well, Mr. Washington said, let's start our work, and I'll tell you the story while we clean. They began in the basement, which was dusty and filled with old boxes and forgotten furniture. As they swept and organized, Mr. Washington told Tommy about the old days in Willowbrook. This was back in 1962. Mr. Washington began. Your daddy was just 22 years old, fresh out of college, and he had big dreams, but no money. He wanted to open a shoe store, but he couldn't afford to rent a decent location. Tommy listened while he dusted off old filing cabinets. He had heard this part of the story before. His father had always said he started with nothing. The only place your daddy could afford was a tiny basement room over on Elm Street. It was dark, damp, and barely big enough for a few shelves of shoes. But it was all he could afford with the little bit of money he had saved. Mr. Washington paused his sweeping and looked at Tommy. That's where my wife Betty comes into the story. Miss Betty? The teacher. That's right. But back then, she was just a young woman working as a maid at the Willowbrook Hotel, just like Mrs. Jordan does. Now, Tommy felt a strange feeling in his stomach. Something about this story was making him nervous. Betty was walking home from work late one night when she saw a light on in that basement store. She looked in the window and saw your daddy sitting on the floor, crying. The store was a mess because it had flooded that afternoon from a broken pipe upstairs. Mr. Washington moved to a new section of the basement, and Tommy followed him. Betty could have just walked on home. She was tired from working all day, and she had her own problems to worry about. But that's not the kind of person she is. What did she do? She knocked on the door and asked if she could help. Your daddy was too proud to accept help at first, but Betty insisted. She came back the next day with cleaning supplies and spent her only day off helping him clean up that flooded store. Tommy stopped dusting and stared at Mr. Washington. Ms. Betty helped my father start his business. Oh, it gets better than that, Mr. Washington said. Betty saw how hard your daddy was trying, how much he wanted to succeed. So she started coming by after work to help him organize his inventory and clean the store. She never asked for any payment. They climbed the stairs to the first floor and started cleaning the hallway. With each step, Tommy felt like he was climbing toward a truth he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. But the biggest help came when your daddy couldn't make his rent, Mr. Washington continued. It was December 1962, and he was 3 months behind on payments. The landlord was going to kick him out right before Christmas. What happened? Betty had been saving money to visit her sick mother in Georgia. She had $47 put away, which was a lot of money for a young maid in 1962. And you know what she did? Tommy's hands stopped moving. His heart was beating fast. What did she do? She gave every penny of that money to your daddy so he could pay his rent and keep his store open. The words hit Tommy like a physical blow. He sat down hard on the steps, feeling dizzy. Ms. Betty gave my father money to save his business? $47, Mr. Washington repeated. Every cent she had in the world. She gave up her chance to see her dying mother so that a young white man she barely knew could keep his dream alive. Tommy felt sick to his stomach. Did my father ever pay her back? Mr. Washington's face grew sad. Your daddy promised he would pay her back as soon as business got better. Betty never asked for the money, but she sure could have used it over the years. He never paid her back, Tommy whispered. Not one penny. And there's more to the story. Tommy didn't want to hear more, but he couldn't stop listening. When your daddy's business started doing well, he moved to a bigger store on Main Street. Then he started looking down on the people who had helped him. He acted like he'd done it, all by himself. He started treating people like Betty and me as if we were beneath him. Tommy remembered all the times his father had talked about the wrong kind of people who didn't belong in their nice store. Now he was learning that his family's success had been built on the kindness of exactly those kinds of people. But here's the worst part, Mr. Washington continued. A few years ago, Betty got sick and needed surgery. The medical bills were huge, and we couldn't afford them. Betty swallowed her pride and went to your daddy's store to ask if he could help her, since she had helped him when he needed it most. Tommy's heart was pounding. What did my father say? He pretended he didn't remember her. He said he didn't know what she was talking about. He told her she must be confused because he had built his business all by himself. Tommy felt tears running down his face. That's horrible. Your daddy has become successful, Tommy. But he's forgotten where he came from and who helped him get there. He's so ashamed of needing help that he's rewritten history in his own mind. They had reached the top floor of the building, but Tommy couldn't focus on the cleaning anymore. His whole world was spinning. Everything he thought he knew about his family was a lie. "Mr. Washington," he said quietly, "does Miss Betty hate my family?" The old man smiled sadly. "Betty doesn't hate anyone, son. That's not who she is. She's disappointed, sure. Hurt that your daddy forgot her kindness. But hate? No. Betty believes that people can change, even when they've lost their way." Tommy sat on a dusty windowsill and put his head in his hands. "How can I ever face her again? How can I face anyone in this town?" "You can start by learning from your daddy's mistakes," Mr. Washington said gently. "You can choose to be the kind of man who remembers where he came from. You can choose to treat people with the same kindness that Betty showed your family." Tommy looked up with tears in his eyes. "What should I do?" "That's up to you, son. But tomorrow is that basketball game. The whole town will be watching. What you do and say tomorrow will show everyone what kind of man you choose to be." As Tommy walked home that evening, his mind was racing. Tomorrow, he would face the entire town. He would either stand up for what was right, or he would repeat his father's mistakes. But one thing was certain. Tommy Peterson would never be the same again. The question was, what was he going to do about it? Sunday morning dawned bright and clear in Willowbrook. By 10 o'clock, it seemed like the entire town had gathered on Main Street. Someone had set up basketball hoops at each end of the street, and orange cones marked the boundaries of the court. Folding chairs lined both sides, filled with excited spectators. Tommy Peterson stood at one end of the makeshift court, wearing simple shorts and a t-shirt. His hands, which had been soft and clean just 1 week ago, were now rough and calloused from real work. But more importantly, his eyes looked different. There was a sadness in them, but also a determination that hadn't been there before. Michael Jordan was warming up at the other end, dribbling with his left hand only, just as he had promised. Even using only his weak hand, he moved with a grace that made everyone stop and watch. This was clearly someone special. Mrs. Chin stood in the middle of the court with a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin this game, Tommy Peterson has asked to say something to the community." Tommy walked slowly to the center of the court. The crowd grew quiet. Everyone was curious about what he would say after his week of working alongside the people he had once looked down on. Tommy took the microphone with shaking hands. He looked out at all the faces watching him. There was Roberto Silva with his wife Maria and their 2 children. There was Ms. Betty Washington sitting next to her husband Henry. There was Mrs. Garcia, tired from working a night shift, but determined to be there. And there was Dolores Jordan, sitting with quiet dignity in the front row. "I want to tell you all a story," Tommy began, his voice nervous but clear. "It's about a young man who thought he was better than other people, who thought that having money made him more important than people who worked with their hands." The crowd listened intently. Some people looked angry, others looked curious. That young man was cruel to a hard-working mother who just wanted to buy shoes for her son. He laughed at her. He made her feel small and worthless. He judged her by her clothes and her job instead of seeing her heart. Tommy paused and looked directly at Dolores Jordan. "That young man was me, and I was wrong." A murmur went through the crowd. This wasn't what they had expected. "This week, I learned what real work looks like. I washed dishes with Roberto Silva, who speaks 4 languages and is studying to become an engineer. I cleaned with Ms. Betty Washington, who spent 40 years teaching children and now teaches adults to read for free. I worked with Mrs. Garcia, who works 2 jobs to support her family and never complains." Tommy's voice grew stronger as he continued. "But I also learned something about my own family that I need to share with all of you." Harold Peterson, who was sitting near the back of the crowd, suddenly looked nervous. 22 years ago, my father wanted to start a shoe store. He had dreams, but no money. His store flooded, and he couldn't afford to fix it. He was about to lose everything." Tommy looked directly at Ms. Betty Washington. A young woman named Betty Washington found him crying in his ruined store. She could have walked away. She had her own problems, her own worries. But instead, she spent her day off helping him clean up. And when he couldn't pay his rent, she gave him $47, every penny she had saved to visit her dying mother. The crowd gasped. People turned to look at Ms. Betty, who sat with tears in her eyes. "That $47 saved my father's business. It's the reason our family has money today. But my father never paid Ms. Betty back. He never even thanked her properly. Instead, he pretended it never happened. He taught me to look down on people like her. Harold Peterson stood up angrily. Tommy, that's enough. You don't know what you're talking about. But Tommy kept speaking. Dad, I know the truth. Mr. Henry Washington told me everything. Ms. Betty sacrificed her last chance to see her mother, so you could keep your dream alive. And you repaid her kindness by treating her like she was nobody. The crowd was completely silent now. Everyone was staring at Harold Peterson, who looked like he wanted to disappear. So I'm not playing this basketball game to prove I'm better than anyone, Tommy continued. I'm playing it to show that I'm choosing to be different from my father. I'm choosing to remember the people who helped me. I'm choosing to treat everyone with respect. Tommy walked over to Ms. Betty Washington and knelt down in front of her chair. Ms. Betty, I can't undo what my father did, but I can promise you that I will never forget your kindness. And I want to give you something. He pulled an envelope from his pocket. This is a check for $4,700. It's not just paying back the money you gave my father. It's 22 years of interest on a debt our family should have paid long ago. Ms. Betty's eyes filled with tears. Tommy, honey, I don't need your money, but I need to give it to you, Tommy said. I need to start making things right. The crowd erupted in applause. People were cheering and crying at the same time. Even some of the people who had been angry at Tommy were now clapping for him. Michael Jordan walked over and put his hand on Tommy's shoulder. That took real courage, Tommy. But now we still have a game to play. Tommy stood up and smiled. You're right. But Michael, I have one more announcement. He took the microphone again. I'm giving up my job at Peterson's shoe store. Roberto Silva deserves that position more than I do. He's smarter, he works harder, and he treats every customer with respect. The crowd cheered even louder. Roberto Silva looked shocked and grateful. And Tommy continued, my family is creating a scholarship fund in Ms. Betty Washington's name. It will help hard-working students go to college, no matter how much money their families have. By now, even Harold Peterson had tears in his eyes. He walked through the crowd to where his son stood. Tommy, he said quietly, I'm proud of you. And I'm ashamed of myself. Father and son hugged in front of the whole town while everyone cheered. But Michael Jordan wasn't finished yet. This is wonderful, Tommy. You've learned the lesson about respect. But I have one more surprise for everyone. The crowd grew quiet. Again, wondering what else could possibly happen. There's someone here today who hasn't been properly introduced, Michael said with that mysterious smile. Someone who has been helping my family for years, but who wanted to keep it a secret. Michael looked directly at Carlos Martinez, who was standing at the edge of the crowd. Carlos, I think it's time to tell everyone who you really are. And with those words, Michael Jordan was about to reveal the biggest surprise of all. The crowd on Main Street held its breath as Michael Jordan walked toward Carlos Martinez. Dolores Jordan sat in her chair, looking confused and a little worried. She had no idea what her son was about to reveal. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael said, his voice carrying clearly over the silent crowd. I want you to meet Carlos Martinez, owner of Martinez Sporting Goods. He came to Willowbrook this week to test Tommy Peterson's character. But what you don't know is why he cared so much about how Tommy treated my mother. Carlos Martinez stepped forward, his expensive suit looking out of place among the folding chairs and basketball hoops. But there was something different about his face now. The confident businessman expression was gone, replaced by something softer and more vulnerable. Carlos, Michael said gently, I think it's time to tell everyone the truth. Carlos looked at Dolores Jordan, who was staring at him with growing recognition in her eyes. 20 years had changed him, but she was beginning to remember a younger man who had left Willowbrook with big dreams and a broken heart. Carlos, Dolores whispered, standing up slowly. Carlos Martinez? Is that really you? The crowd murmured with confusion. How did Mrs. Jordan know this rich businessman? Carlos smiled, and suddenly he looked exactly like the young man who had left town 2 decades ago. Hello, sister. The word hit the crowd like lightning. Sister? Carlos Martinez was Dolores Jordan's brother? Dolores put her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Carlos. Oh my goodness, Carlos. I thought I'd never see you again. She ran toward him, and Carlos caught her in a huge hug that lifted her off the ground. Brother and sister held each other tight, while the entire town watched in amazement. I don't understand, said Mrs. Chun, speaking for everyone. Mr. Martinez, you're Michael Jordan's uncle? I am, Carlos said, still holding his sister. I've been living in the city for 20 years, building my business. But I never forgot where I came from, and I never stopped caring about my family. Michael walked over to join them. Uncle Carlos has been helping us for years, Mama. Remember all those times I came home with extra money from basketball camps and part-time jobs? That money came from Uncle Carlos. Dolores pulled back to look at her brother's face. You've been sending us money? But I told you when you left that we would be fine on our own. I know you did, Carlos said gently. You're too proud to accept help, Dolores. Just like you were when we were kids. But I couldn't stand the thought of you working 3 jobs while I had more money than I knew what to do with. But why didn't you just come home? Why all the secrecy? Carlos's face grew sad. Because I was ashamed. When I left Willowbrook, I was angry at this town. Angry at the way people treated our family because we were poor. I swore I'd never come back until I could show everyone how successful I'd become. He looked around at all the faces watching them. But success made me bitter. I thought I was better than this place. I thought I was better than the people who had looked down on us. I was wrong. Tommy Peterson, who had been watching this reunion with amazement, stepped forward. Mr. Martinez, you came back because of what I did to Mrs. Jordan, didn't you? Carlos nodded. When Michael called me and told me how you had treated my sister, I realized that running away from this town hadn't solved anything. There are still people here who judge others by their appearance or their bank account. And there are still good people here who deserve respect and kindness. But more than that, Carlos continued, I realized that I had become just as bad as the people I was angry at. I had so much money and success, but I was hiding from my own family because I was too proud to admit I missed them. Michael put his arm around his mother's shoulders. Uncle Carlos, tell them about your plan. Carlos smiled. Well, I've been thinking about retiring from the big city business. I want to come home to Willowbrook and open a new sporting goods store here. But I don't want to run it alone. He turned to face Dolores directly. Sister, I want you to be my business partner. You know this community better than anyone. You know what it means to work hard and treat people right. I have the money and the business experience, but you have something more important. You have wisdom and kindness. The crowd gasped. Dolores Jordan, the hotel maid who worked 3 jobs, was being offered the chance to become a business owner. Carlos, I don't know anything about running a business, Dolores said. You know everything about running a business, Carlos replied. You know about hard work, customer service, and treating people with respect. Those are the most important things in any business. Michael grinned. Mama, you've been managing 3 different jobs for years. You've been teaching me about respect and dignity my whole life. You're the smartest businesswoman I know. Roberto Silva stepped forward from the crowd. Mrs. Jordan, if you start a business, I would be honored to work for you. So would I, said Ms. Betty Washington. Me too, called out Mrs. Garcia soon. Half the crowd was volunteering to work for or shop at a store run by Dolores Jordan. People who had been overlooked and undervalued were rallying around someone who had always treated them with kindness. But Tommy Peterson had the biggest surprise of all. Mrs. Jordan, he said, walking up to her with a humble expression, I know. I don't deserve it after how I treated you. But would you consider letting me work for you? Starting at the bottom, earning my way up through hard work and respect. The crowd held its breath. Would Dolores Jordan give Tommy Peterson a second chance? Dolores looked at Tommy for a long moment. She saw the blisters on his hands from a week of hard work. She saw the genuine remorse in his eyes. She saw a young man who had learned from his mistakes and was trying to become better. Tommy, she said softly, everyone deserves a second chance. But you'll have to prove yourself every single day. Yes, ma'am, Tommy said gratefully. I understand. Carlos clapped his hands together. Then it's settled. Martinez and Jordan Sporting Goods will open next month. We'll sell quality athletic equipment to everyone in this community, and we'll treat every customer with the same respect, whether they're buying expensive shoes or just looking around. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. People were crying and laughing and hugging each other. What had started as a lesson about respect had turned into something much bigger, a new beginning for the entire community. But Michael Jordan wasn't quite finished. There's one more thing, he announced. Next year, when I'm playing in the NBA, I'm going to make sure that Martinez and Jordan Sporting Goods becomes the official supplier of basketball shoes for my youth basketball camps. Kids from all over the country will come to Willowbrook to learn basketball and to shop at a store that treats everyone with dignity. The crowd went wild. Their little town was going to be famous, not for exclusion and prejudice, but for respect and opportunity. As the celebration continued around them, Michael pulled his mother and uncle aside for a private moment. "Mama," he said, "you taught me that how we treat people when they can't do anything for us shows who we really are." Today, this whole town learned that lesson. Dolores looked around at all the happy faces. Roberto teaching his children to dribble a basketball, Miss Betty hugging Tommy Peterson, Harold Peterson shaking hands with people he had previously ignored. "You know what the best part is?" she said to her son and brother. "This isn't really about basketball or shoe stores or even about teaching Tommy a lesson. It's about people remembering that we're all part of the same community. We all deserve kindness and respect." 1 year later, Martinez and Jordan Sporting Goods was the most successful store in Willowbrook. Dolores Jordan had become one of the most respected business owners in the region. Tommy Peterson had worked his way up to assistant manager through genuine hard work and treating every customer like family. Roberto Silva was studying for his engineering license at night while managing the store's inventory during the day. Ms. Betty Washington ran a literacy program in the store's community room every Tuesday evening. Mrs. Garcia had been promoted to head of customer service, and Michael Jordan? He had indeed become the most famous basketball player in the world. But whenever reporters asked him about his success, he always told them the same thing. "My mother taught me that respect and kindness are more important than fame or money. Everything good in my life started with that lesson." The story of what happened in Willowbrook became famous too. People called it the day Michael Jordan taught a town about respect. It was told in schools and churches and community centers all across the country. But the people of Willowbrook knew the real truth. It wasn't really Michael Jordan who taught them about respect. It was a hotel maid named Dolores Jordan who had been teaching that lesson her whole life, simply by treating every person she met with dignity and kindness. And sometimes, the most powerful lessons come not from famous people or grand gestures, but from ordinary people doing extraordinary things with love and grace every single day. And that's how one moment of cruelty became a lifetime lesson in respect and kindness. Just like Dolores Jordan taught her son, we all have the power to treat others with dignity, no matter who they are or where they come from. Every person has a story. Every person deserves respect. Where are you listening from today? Drop a comment below and let us know your city or country. We love hearing from our amazing listeners around the world. If this story touched your heart and reminded you about the importance of kindness, please hit that like button to spread this message to more people. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel, because when we share stories about respect and compassion, we help make the world a little bit kinder, one story at a time. Click on the video appearing on your screen right now for another incredible story that will inspire you to treat everyone with the respect they deserve. Remember, how you treat people when they can't do anything for you shows who you really are. Thanks for listening, and keep spreading kindness.